You know, when they start asking you what religion you're a part of, you know damn well that they want to kill you. Going door to door around the neighborhood, imploring people to turn in their weapons. Yeah, that's not a good sign. When they start asking you for your weapons, when they want to confiscate your guns, you know what that means, right? That means that they want to do a massacre without you having the ability to fight back. Syrian refugees in Germany are glad they can visit home, but just visit. Oh, I thought the source of all the problems was Bashar. How come now they don't want to leave Germany? Oh, it's because they would rather live with Hans than live with Ahmed. The problem is that Hans is losing his patience, and Germans are, by the millions, they are voting for an ultra-nationalist party called the AfD. And so right now, from what I understand, the AfD is now the second most popular party in Germany. And this party used to be just a fringe party. It wasn't really that big at all when it first got conceived. But now the AfD is the second biggest party. And I've talked about this many times, but the guy who is, or one of the guys who's running the party is a guy by the name of Bjorn Höcke. He is one of the major leaders of the party. He's probably the most famous leader running the AfD. Bjorn Höcke used to write for Nazi publications. He used to write Nazi articles praising the Third Reich. And that's who Germans are voting for. That's who's getting the second most amount of votes in Germany. It's Bjorn Höcke and his party. And you want to be a refugee in this country, and you see Elon Musk backing the AfD. He came out and said that the only hope that Germany has is the AfD. And the AfD has been running with that since then. They have been saying, well, Elon Musk has said that the only hope that Germany has is our party, so vote for us. And so you see Elon Musk using the power of X, using the power of Twitter, and using his voice to back the German nationalist. And Elon Musk is a what? He's a eugenist. He wants to inject into everyone's heads this Neuralink device. He wants to put computer chips into everyone's brains. And he believes that by injecting people with Neuralinks, that their brains are going to get better, and it's going to be this transhumanist idea of merging man with machine, and that the people who will have the Neuralink in their brains are going to be functioning and performing better than the ones who are not going to have the Neuralink. And he believes that in the next 15 years or so, millions of people are going to have Neuralink. And the people who will not have Neuralink are not going to perform as efficiently as those who will have the Neuralink. And he says that the injecting of the Neuralink microchip into people's brains is going to be a part of human evolution, the next step of human evolution. And what did the Germans believe? What did the Nazis believe? The Nazis believed that by enacting eugenic policy, that they were transitioning into the next step of human evolution. All right, everyone. So we are going to talk about Syria. I know, right? Another video about Syria. Why am I talking about Syria so much? Well, because, my friends, you are witnessing the revival of Turkish power in the Near East. It is a very, very interesting time to be alive. It really is, because we are seeing something that we have not seen for many, many decades, and that is Turkish power, and we are seeing its revival, the revival of Ottoman power. And you are seeing the beginning of this happening in the country of Syria, and so that is why Syria is a main focus of this YouTube channel. And it's not just that, it's also really because, and this is the main reason, it's because of the immense suffering that is going to happen as a result of this. And I should say that this is actually the only reason why we should be focusing on this, because that is what's going to happen. Israel is using the whole thing to expand its borders. The United States is backing a bunch of Islamist fanatics. Turkey is using these fanatics as proxies, and these fanatics are causing violence, and this is not shocking at all. They are targeting the Alawites, they are targeting Christians, they are targeting Kurds who are against Turkish expansionism. And now that they control Syria, they are really, really targeting the Alawites. They're targeting the Alawites more than they're targeting the Christians, from what I understand, because you see, these rebels, they want to show the world that they are civilized. They want to show the world that they are not murderers. And so they know that if they start really attacking Christians, that the whole world, the Western world especially, is going to say, oh, look, these Syrian rebels, they're evil, they're lunatics, they're persecuting Christians. And the Western world still identifies, generally speaking, identifies as Christian. And so it wouldn't look good for the Syrian rebels if they start hunting down Christians. But they're hunting down Alawites. And people, for the most part, don't care so much about Alawites as much as they do Christians. And so they're attacking the Alawites. Nonetheless, the world is watching. And a lot of people have been looking at the persecution of the Alawites. And a lot of people have been looking at that saying, look, the rotten fruits of the Syrian revolution. And so the Alawites are being hunted down, and they have been killing Alawites. They entered a mosque, an Alawite shrine, really, and they butchered all of the guards. And you see the video. They're stepping on the guards' bodies, and they're just in elation. They're in ecstasy over the fact that they have just murdered Alawites. The hatred runs that deep. And it's obvious that Syria is in chaos. It's obvious that Syria is not a stable place. It's not. Even though not everybody, but the Western media was putting so much blame on Bashar al-Assad for Syria's problems. And the main narrative of the mainstream was that Bashar al-Assad is the problem. But now that Assad is gone, you would expect, if we are to follow the narrative, you would expect that Syria would be a better place, right? And it's not a better place. It's being ravished. It's been ravished by Turkey, by Israel. Israel, like I said, has expanded its borders into Syria. You see Turkey now being the main master over that country. They are making Syria into essentially a Turkish territory. And America is behind this. America has been supporting this wholeheartedly. Why is that? Well, it's one word, Russia. That is it. That's it. America doesn't want Russia in Syria, and so America says, okay, we would rather just back a bunch of Islamist fanatics than allow Russia to have any sort of foothold in Syria. And so America is backing Russia's biggest historical enemy, and that is Turkey. And that's what's happening. This is all about fighting the Russians. It really is that simple. And so in this whole quagmire of geopolitical intrigue, we see the Islamists doing exactly what they have been doing for years and what they have been wanting to do, and that is to butcher the Alawites. You see, Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite. And so as long as Bashar al-Assad was in power, the Alawites were in power. But now the Alawites are no longer in power because Bashar al-Assad was overthrown and he escaped to Russia. Who could blame him? If the guy was caught by the rebels, they would have shoved a stick up his ass, just like they did Gaddafi, and they would have raped his wife. So I really can't blame the guy. Now, you could say he was a coward, but let's be real here. Any one of us would have done the same damn thing. Really. So Assad is no longer there, and that means that the Alawites are no longer in power. So what does that mean? That means it's open season on the Alawites. And so Syria is still a very, very unstable place. It's still a very violent place. And that is the reason why Syrian migrants living in Germany don't want to leave Germany. Are we shocked? Are we stunned? Are we surprised? Because people were saying, right after Bashar al-Assad was overthrown, people were saying what? Well, it's time for all the migrants to leave. It's time for all of the Syrian refugees in Germany to leave. It's time for them to go away and go back to their home country. And why was that? Well, part of this is the mainstream narrative that was being pushed for over a decade. And that is, well, Syria is in a terrible situation because of Bashar al-Assad. And the main narrative in regards to the refugee crisis was that these refugees were leaving to Germany to flee Bashar al-Assad. That was the main narrative. And so Bashar al-Assad is now gone, and everyone, following the logical conclusion of the mainstream narrative, is saying, well, go back to Syria. Assad is gone. The problem is gone, but they don't want to go back. And this is exactly what I expected was going to happen. I expected that the Syrians living in Germany would not want to leave, and I was right. I like being right because I like the fact that my suspicions have been confirmed. It shows us that we are seeing things clearly when we see that we are correct. And that's always a good thing. The Syrian refugees don't want to go back to Syria. Why is that? Well, because Syria is still very, very unstable, and it's being ran by a bunch of ISIS lunatics. So who in the hell would want to go to such a country? Now, I have read that thousands of Syrians have left Turkey to go back to Syria, and they have left Lebanon. But the reason for that is quite simple. The reason for that is because the Turks and the Lebanese have been treating the Syrians like animals. They hate the Syrians, and they are extremely racist towards Syrians. They don't like them. The Lebanese hate the Syrians because Hafez al-Assad, Bashar al-Assad's father, invaded Lebanon decades ago. And then the Turks hate the Syrians because, according to the Turks, the Syrians bring crime, and the Syrians take welfare, and the Turkish economy is terrible, and the Turkish lira has been really awful, has been quite diminished. And meanwhile, in the midst of all this economic chaos, Syrian refugees have taken Turkish welfare, have taken Turkish government money. And so this has angered and enraged a lot of the Turkish people. In fact, this is probably the most unpopular move that Erdogan ever did, and that was to allow or really to absorb so many Syrian refugees into Turkey. So a lot of Syrians have left Turkey, a lot of Syrians have left Lebanon, but that's because the Turks and the Lebanese are not very nice. The Germans are a lot nicer. They are a lot more compassionate than the Turks and the Lebanese, and they have been a lot more compassionate, but that is going down. That is declining. And yes, the Germans are a lot nicer, but that's only going to last for so long. And we are seeing that niceness. We are seeing that kindness really going down. It has been going down for years. And so Hans in Germany, he doesn't want to see Syrians anymore. He doesn't want to see refugees. He doesn't want to see migrants. And that's why the AfD has become so incredibly popular in Germany. AfD, or the Alternative for Deutschland Party, is incredibly popular. And according to the polls, according to at least one poll that I saw recently, the AfD party is now the second most popular party in Germany. And why is that? The reason for that is because Hans doesn't want to see Syrians anymore. So yes, the Germans have been nice, but that niceness is becoming very, very short. And it's standing on just a few more legs. So I want to read to you guys some articles today, and this really connects with the instability of Syria and the fact that a lot of Syrians in Germany don't want to leave Germany, and how this really connects with the rise of the far right. And this is a very interesting phenomenon that we are witnessing, because not only are we witnessing the revival of Turkish power, but we are also witnessing for the first time since the 1930s, the rise of German nationalism. And we are really seeing the revival of German nationalism. And considering Germany's history, this should not make us excited. We should not really be optimistic about this at all. I know, right? It's a real shocker. If you guys are history buffs, I mean, you guys should know that this is not really good. Not really good at all. 2 world wars. 2 world wars. We saw part 1. We saw part 2 in the saga, and it looks like the Germans are heading towards a part 3. So here is the article here. This is about Alawites being hunted down in Syria. And it really shows that Syria is not a safe place. Even though Assad is gone and Assad was the one who was blamed for a lot of Syria's problems, Syria is not a safe place, and that's quite obvious. It's a very unstable and chaotic place. And so it says here, Alawites live in fear as Syrian rebels hunt members of Assad's regime. And it says here that the Alawite community is gripped by terror. No surprise there. The Alawites are by far, from what I understand, the Alawites are the most hated group within all of the Islamic world. You have the Ahmadis, which are another minority sect within Islam. The Ahmadis are hated, and they have been hunted down because they simply believe that Jesus was crucified. I'm not joking. You can look into this. The Ahmadis are an Islamic sect who believe that Jesus was crucified. And for that, they're hunted down, and the Alawites are just a sect of Shia Islam, and they are considered to be worse than pagans in the Islamic world, in the Sunni Islamic world, and so they are deemed as basically being worthy of being hunted down like animals. So it's open season on the Alawites. And it says here that violence came roaring into this village in western Syria last week when war was supposed to have receded. And look at the first line of this article. War was supposed to have receded. Really? Really? Look at these people. Look at these gremlins. You see these guys just overrunning Syria, and we're supposed to expect that war should have receded by now? Is this a joke? Are the authors of this article really that oblivious? I have been looking at the Syrian revolution since 2012, and since that time I knew that the Syrian revolution was evil, and the Syrian revolution has now succeeded thanks to the help of Turkey, the United States, and Israel. And so the fact that the Syrian revolution was always Islamist should make it quite obvious to anyone that Syria is being overran by a bunch of ISIS thugs. And so really nothing good can come of that. And it says here that munitions fired by former rebels tore through homes, killed a teenage boy, and left fears of vicious reckonings to come after the fall of Bashar al-Assad. A sense of euphoria in much of Syria has been tempered by dread in areas like Khirbet al-Hammam, where most residents are Alawites. And these people are definitely not optimistic or euphoric or enthusiastic about the Syrian revolution, because the Syrian revolution has nothing to do with bringing liberty to Syria. The Syrian revolution has everything to do with establishing a Sunni utopia. And believe me, there's no utopia in this. It's dystopia. They will think that it would be a utopia to establish Sunni Sharia law, but the reality is that it's going to be a dystopia. And Syria is already a dystopia. It's a dystopian society. It's a country that's not really ran by these rebels. Now it's fully under the control of NATO. You see, this is what the whole thing was about. This is what it was about. It had nothing to do with liberty and freedom and, power to the people. It had nothing to do with that at all. From the beginning, it was about controlling Syria. That's what this was about, and now you're seeing it. NATO now fully controls Syria, and it was always about keeping the Russians out. That was the whole damn motivation. That was the whole damn objective. Keep the Russians out, put the Turks there, put the head choppers there. It doesn't matter if the Turks want to resume the Armenian genocide. It doesn't matter if Turkey did war crimes in Azerbaijan and butchered civilians. No. Who cares? No one really gives a damn about civilians. No one gives a damn about genocide. It's all about power at the end of the day. So America says, Turkey, you run the damn country. And this is what Trump was actually talking about. This is what he meant when he said years ago, when he was president the first time, he said something like, Syria is just a desert tainted with blood. It's stained with blood. It's been stained with blood for centuries or whatever. And let someone else deal with Syria. This is what Trump said. He said, let someone else handle Syria. Well, who was that someone else? Obviously, it was Turkey. So the Americans basically are saying we would rather have a bunch of neo-Ottoman lunatics who want to resume from where they left off in the Armenian genocide than have the Russians in Syria. That's what the Americans are saying. So there really is no euphoria amongst the Alawites. There is no euphoria amongst the Christians. Now, why is that? Why aren't the Christians euphoric about Bashar al-Assad being overthrown? Why aren't the Alawites euphoric? If this was really about the Syrian people, why aren't these minority groups enthusiastic about Bashar being toppled? It's quite obvious, because this has nothing to do with the Syrian people. This has everything to do with the Sunni people. And you have these Uyghurs. You have thousands of Uyghur Muslims in Syria. Now, Uyghurs, for those of you who don't know, the Uyghurs are basically a Mongolian, Turkic Muslim people who live in Western China. They live in a region of China known as the Xinjiang province, and it's in the western part of China. And the Turks have been recruiting these Uyghur Turkic Islamists. Now, people in Turkey, they have this sort of fantasy, and it may not be a fantasy in the future. They may actually bring this to fruition, but the Turks love this idea of running the Turkic world, having Turkey run this Turkic union, this Turkic confederacy, in which you'll have Anatolia running these Turkic countries like Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. The thing is that the Uyghurs are officially a part of China. Uyghur, or Xinjiang, is officially a part of China. It's a region of China. And so the Uyghurs are under Chinese control. They are under the Chinese government. And Turkey wants that to end. Turkey wants to see that Uyghur region of China break away and become a part of this Turkic NATO, this Turkic confederacy. And the Americans want to use the Uyghur terrorists. There is a terrorist organization. It's called TIP. I think that stands for Turkmenistan Islamist Party or something like that. TIP, you can look it up. They're a bunch of lunatics. They're Turkic fanatics, and they want to establish Sharia law, and they want to establish an Islamist state in Xinjiang. They want to get that region to break away, to sever from China, and they want to form their own Islamist state. And if they manage to do this, that state will just be another part of Turkey's revived, or Turkey's empire, because I was going to say revived Ottoman Empire, but the Ottomans never controlled the Xinjiang. This is why it's called a Neo-Ottoman Empire, because it's the old Ottoman Empire, but mixed in with new territories that Turkey wants to include into its fold of Turkic power. And the NATO people, the people who are running NATO, they want to use the Uyghurs to destabilize Western China. That's what they want to do. TIP was pushed out of Xinjiang by the Chinese government, and they went to Syria, where they were used by the Turkish government to fight against Bashar al-Assad's forces. Turkey trained TIP. Turkey trained them, and they got battle-hardened through their battles with the Syrian military. So now they know about warfare. They have experience on the battlefield. And my suspicion is that NATO plans to smuggle these Islamists back into Xinjiang to destabilize Western China and start a jihad in that region. And that jihad would attract other Islamists from the neighboring Central Asian countries like Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Afghanistan, and those Islamists would enter the fray against the Chinese government, thus destabilizing Western China. And I think this is part of that whole deal. This is part of the plan in America's war against Chinese power in Asia. Now, because China really, economically speaking, China is the biggest competitor to the United States. It's not Russia. The Russian economy is really just as big as the Italian economy. So economically speaking, Russia is not really a huge threat to the Americans, but China is. China has a massive economy with a massive GDP. So America really wants to weaken China. So in Syria, you have these Turkic fighters who are being backed by Turkey. and they're in Syria. And so if this was about the Syrian people, then why in the hell do you have these Turkic fighters there? Why? Why do you have these Islamo-Mongolian Turkish fighters? It just doesn't make any sense unless you recognize the fact that this is not a Syrian revolution. This is an Islamist revolution. It really is that simple. And so Bashar al-Assad was fighting Islamists. Why are Syrian refugees not comfortable with the idea of leaving Germany and going back to Syria if Bashar al-Assad was truly the problem? It's because you have a bunch of fanatics overrunning the country, and they don't want to be there. They would much rather be with Hans. The problem is that Hans is losing his patience because you have these acts of terrorism that have happened in Germany over the years, and Hans is losing his patience. And Hans is voting for what is essentially just a repackaged Nazi party. The AfD is a Naziistic party, and we'll get to that. We'll get more into that in a moment here. So it says here that, let's scroll down here. It says here that Iyad Holo, a 40-year-old painter, said he was standing near his house with his son when it was hit Thursday night. God saved us, he said, but a local boy, Amin Al-Yusuf, 16, was killed in front of Holo's home while riding his motorcycle with his brother who was injured. So they're already murdering people. It's already happening, and it's only going to get worse. It says here that this region around Homs is one of several areas across Syria endangered by sectarian strife as former rebels hunt old tormentors. So they're going after people who supposedly tormented or tortured people for the Assad regime. And it says here that Alawites, whom Assad recruited as military allies, even as the community remained poor and marginalized, have borne the brunt of the fury directed at the fallen regime. And these Alawites aren't rich. You know, for years there was all this talk about how the Alawites were rich and how they were making money, more money than the Sunnis. And a lot of this, you see, a lot of this whole revolutionary thinking within Syria was born from envy. The Sunnis didn't like the fact that they were being ruled over by an Alawite. That's pretty much what this came down to. They didn't like that this Alawite is running us. A Sunni should be the one ruling over us. And so it was all this Sunni pride insanity, kind of like how in Northern Ireland there was all this talk, there was all this acrimonious rhetoric coming from the Protestants about how they didn't want to be ruled by Catholics, and so they wanted their own little state so that they wouldn't have to be under a government ran by Catholics. They didn't like that. And so you see this similar mentality in Syria, and they didn't want to be ran by Alawites, and so this was part of the reason why they did this revolution. Again, this is about establishing a Sunni society, This is not about establishing democracy or freedom. That's just a bunch of garbage. And it says here, terrorists. They are all terrorists, a man screamed outside a checkpoint in Homs last week toward an Alawite neighborhood. So this Sunni guy was screaming towards the Alawite neighborhood, essentially saying that all of the Alawites are terrorists. Imagine that, a terrorist calling other people terrorists. It says here that tumult in the region accelerated last week when a video circulated online showing an apparent attack by armed men on an Alawite shrine in Aleppo. And yes, I saw this video, and the article doesn't mention the fact that there was a whole strewn of bodies on the floor of the Alawite shrine. And you can see it in the video. All these Sunnis stepping on the bodies of these Alawites, screaming Allahu Akbar. They're so proud about the fact that they've just murdered a bunch of people. And why are they so proud about this? Why would they be so proud about butchering people? Well, because these people are Alawites, so we have the right to murder them. And this is the type of, demonic mentality that you're dealing with. And some guy named Ali, he came out. He's an Alawite. Or he was an Alawite. I think he's dead now. But he came out and he said, "They burned our shrine. We will burn mosques." And so what does this tell us, right? What it tells us is that the war is not ending. This violence, sectarian violence, it's going to continue on in Syria. And my theory is that what's going to happen in Syria is that the disorder is going to continue. Sectarian violence is going to continue. And Turkey's going to come out and say, well, we have to go in there because the Kurds are fighting with our proxies, with our HTS and our with our SNA proxies. And we have to go in there and we have to bring order to Syria. And they're going to use the violence, they're going to use the civil war that's ongoing in Syria as a pretext to really do a deep military deployment in that area. Now, Turkey already has a very large military presence in northern Syria, but what I'm talking about is a full-on military takeover of the country. So right now, Turkey is just running Syria through its proxies, its SNA and HTS proxies, but I believe that eventually Turkey is going to do a full-scale takeover of the country, and they're going to do so under a certain pretext, and I believe that that pretext will be the presence of war in that country. And they're going to say, well, we have the Kurds in Syria, and these Kurds are out of control, and they're fighting our proxies, and they're killing our proxies, and we have to take them down. Or who knows, there may be a terrorist attack in Turkey, and the Turkish government will say, well, the terrorist attack was done by the PKK, and the PKK's extension in Syria is the YPG, and we have to go into Syria and take them out. We got to take out these Kurdish militants, and we have to do a full-scale takeover because there's still sectarian violence happening in other parts of Syria. You have these Sunnis and Alawites killing and fighting each other. We really have to bring order into that region. I think something like that will play out eventually. And so it says here that there was a protest in Homs on December 25th, Christmas. And it says here that the Alawites were protesting in this area, and the protest ended with gunfire. And it says here that residents said rebel fighters fired on the crowd, killing at least one person. So sectarian violence is still ongoing. They were making it out to be that Bashar al-Assad was the problem. He was the guy. He was the source of Syria's problem, not the rebels. And I'm telling you, I have this book. I had to put the book down because I really hate reading bullshit. I have an allergic reaction to bullshit. And there was a book that I was reading last year. It was about the Syrian Revolution. And so I thought, okay, I'll read this book on the Syrian Revolution. I might learn something about it. And I did learn a thing or two, don't get me wrong, but the book was just filled with this rhetoric essentially saying that Assad was the problem and essentially arguing that the rebels began to do these shootings the rebels began to become violent as a response to Bashar al-Assad. Well, Assad is gone. That's it. So the violence should have ended. The violence should have ended when Bashar al-Assad ran away to Russia. Why is it still going on? Because the problem was not Bashar. It's so obvious. The problem was not Bashar al-Assad. The problem was the Sunnis from the beginning. It really was. They say, oh, well, but Bashar al-Assad, he's the guy. And the reason why the rebels were violent is because Bashar was violent. And they never really consider the fact that the rebels were doing violence. The rebels being backed by the CIA began to do violence. They began to foment revolution. And what did the Bashar al-Assad government do? Did it sit there and say, well, Did Bashar sit there and tell his wife, well, honey, I'm sorry, but the people want to do a revolution, so they're going to stick a stick up my ass just like they did to my friend Gaddafi, and I'm sorry, honey, but they're going to rape you. And it's, this is democracy, the freedom to sodomize and rape your dictators. That's part of democracy and liberty, and we have to respect that, and we have to just bow down and get ravished by our NATO masters. And any government would have fought the rebels. And so Bashar al-Assad was simply doing what any government would do in the face of a massive insurgency that was being backed by the most powerful country in the world. And so, of course, Bashar was going to fight these people. Of course, there was going to be torture. Of course, there was going to be rebels being killed. Of course, there was going to be cases of people being killed because they held anti-government sentiment, or people being put into prison because they held anti-government sentiment, or because they were a part of a conspiracy to overthrow the government. That is utterly conspicuous and obvious and clear to anyone. Did Bashar al-Assad's people do bad things? Yes, they did. I will say it. I saw a video of a bunch of people being shot by some of Bashar al-Assad's guys, and the video is from years ago, but those things did happen. Yes, they did. Does that mean that we should support ISIS? Obviously not. But you see, that's what they want you to think. They want you to think that because Bashar was bad, these rebels need to be supported. So these people's logic is so warped and just whacked. Their logic is because Bashar al-Assad was bad, we have to support people who are worse. That's essentially the logic of the people who support the Syrian revolution. And people were making it out, NATO's propagandists, they were making it out to be that Assad was the problem. He was the reason why there was all this violence. And if that truly was the case, then there should be no violence in Syria right now. Syria right now should be a paradise because the root of all the people's problem, the root of all the people's problems is gone. But that's not the case because Bashar al-Assad was not the root of the problem. Bashar al-Assad was merely a dictator who wanted to stay in power. That's it. Just like Gaddafi, just like Saddam, just like Mubarak. He was simply a dictator who wanted to remain in power. That's it. And he was fighting people who wanted to overthrow him. And the people he was fighting are now overrunning the country, and they are bringing what? They're bringing the violence that Bashar al-Assad was trying to stop. So really, the proof that Bashar al-Assad was not the root of Syria's problems is seen in Syria right now. What's happening in Syria right now vindicates Bashar al-Assad. It vindicates him because if he was the source of all the problems, there should be no problems, but there's problems. There's violence, sectarian violence. They're butchering Alawites. They're attacking Christians. They burned down a Christmas tree because, Christmas is pagan. And, I was looking at that story, the story of the burning down of this Christmas tree, and you see how the Sunnis burned this Christmas tree in Syria, and I'm thinking the Sunni Muslims are fanatics. They are extremely rigid, and they are Calvinists. They're Calvinists in the sense that they believe in predestination. Islam rejects free will, just like Calvinism rejects free will. And so what we are seeing is basically just a bunch of Unitarian Calvinists. Islam is a Unitarian religion. It rejects the Trinity. It rejects the divinity of Christ. So what we are seeing is really just the rise of Unitarian Calvinism, Middle Eastern style, and just like the Puritans tried to ban Christmas, these Sunnis want to do the same thing, and that's why they burned a Christmas tree. And so the Christians are being targeted, and the Alawites are being targeted, and also Kurds who don't want to be under Turkification are being targeted. So let's go back to this article here, and this is a long video, but this is basically like a stream. You're basically looking at a stream, but it's pre-recorded. And it says here, let's see here. It says here that members of an Alawite family that lived in Akrama, one of the neighborhoods, said they were still fearful of leaving their homes. Why are they fearful? Why are they fearful? Bashar was the tyrant. He was the tyrant. Why in the hell are these people fearful? The tyrant is gone, right? I mean, it should be safe to be in Syria. Syria should be a very calm and peaceful place right now. But that's just not the case because the problem at the end of the day was not Assad. The problem was these people who want to establish Sharia law in Syria. And so it says here that members of an Alawite family that lived in Akrama, one of the neighborhoods, said they were still fearful of leaving their homes, especially after sunset. So this is Syria with NATO's peace and democracy. Terrified of leaving your own home because you don't want to get your head chopped off by NATO's proxies. The parents ventured out for a few hours Saturday to shop, but would not let their 26-year-old son out of the house, worried he would not return. And this lady who was fearful to even leave her own home, she says they, meaning the rebels, were in the wild fighting. What are they going to do in the cities? The mother said, referencing the long hair of some of the former rebels, some of whom, she said, were asking residents which sect they belonged to. Oof. You know, when they start asking you what religion you're a part of, you know damn well that they want to kill you. In fact, I saw this video, very disturbing video. It was a video of a Sunni Muslim imam in a Christian man's home. And this imam, he just walked into this guy's house and he sat on this guy's couch, and this poor Christian guy, you can tell by his face that the guy is absolutely terrified.
شاب هون نصراني من قلبية فعم ندعوه لدعوة الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم، دعوة الإسلام. فحرام هالوجه هذا المنور تلدعه النار، فإن شاء الله وتعالى بده يكون من أتباع الرسول صلى الله عليه وسلم. الله يا أخوي
الله يجزيك الخير يا أبو سيد، الله يجزيك الخير على الكلام الطيب هيك.
وإن شاء الله لازم يكون نحن من أتباع مين؟ سيدنا محمد.
الله يجزيك الخير يا أحمد على الكلام الطيب. ها بتكون دعاة للناس بما يرضي الله.
نحن ما بنريد حدا إنسان ينحرق في نار جهنم، شايف علي؟ بنريده منين؟ أهل التوحيد. من أهل شو؟ أهل التوحيد. أيوة.
الله يجزيك الخير. إن شاء الله صار الشاب إن شاء الله بكون على خير.
إن شاء الله برجع لكم على المشفى.
And this imam says, "Oh, do you want to convert to Islam? Do you want to convert to Islam?" And the Christian guy has made it clear already that he doesn't want to convert to Islam, and it's basically Mormonism on steroids. So imagine a bunch of Mormons coming to your house, and instead of knocking on your door and just saying, "Hey, do you want to hear about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints?" "No, I'm not interested." "Well, we have a book." "No, I'm not interested." "Well, we have a 35-minute loan." "No, I'm not interested. Get the hell out of my house." Now imagine if those Mormons had power, and instead of you just yelling at them and then leaving, they just knock on your door and you open the door and they just walk in with their little Book of Mormon Bibles, their little Latter-day Saints Book of Mormon texts in their hands, and they just sit on your couch and they're like, "Hey, do you want to convert to Mormonism?" No. "What are you doing in my house?" Yeah, it's such a shame that you don't want to convert to the true teachings of Jesus Christ as given to us by the angel Moroni through the prophet Joseph Smith. Don't you want to convert? And they have some guys in front of your house with machine guns. Well, this would be America, so they would have AR-15s. But yeah, this imam sits on this guy's couch and he says, "Oh, it's such a shame that our Christian neighbor here doesn't want to convert to Islam." And then he touches this is really creepy. He touches the Christian guy's face and he says, "Such a radiant face. He doesn't want to convert to Islam." As if to say, such a beautiful face would be such a shame if it got lobbed off of your body after we decapitate you. I mean, it's so obviously aggressive and threatening, but it's passive aggressive. It's this form of aggression where they're acting nice, they're feigning niceness to you, but underneath it all, they want to kill you. It's just so damn weird and creepy. And so when they start asking you, "Hey, what religion are you a part of?" I mean, why do you think they're asking you that? You think they're asking that question because they want to, I don't know, invite you over to some religious diversity event, some multi-faith festival or something like that? Like they want to kill you. They want to persecute you. And so they want to know who lives where. They want to know the Alawites live there, the Christians are in this house, there's a Christian in this neighborhood. That's what these people want to know. And it says here that the father, now check this out. Now you know, just by reading this part here, you know that things are going to get really bad. It says here that the father's cell phone rang. "We went and got bread and came back," he told the concerned friend. "God willing, the situation will be fine." The father made another call to local leaders who were busy. He said, "Going door to door around the neighborhood, imploring people to turn in their weapons." Yeah, that's not a good sign. When they start asking you for your weapons, when they want to confiscate your guns, you know what that means, right? That means that they want to do a massacre without you having the ability to fight back. And as I was reading this, I was reminded of something that happened in Ottoman history. So let's go back a little bit and do a history lesson here. Let's go to this Wikipedia page. So this is the Wikipedia page on a massacre that happened back in the 1800s under the Ottoman Empire, and it's called the Batak Massacre. Any sort of there it is, Batak Massacre. Any sort of person who has studied Ottoman atrocities will tell you about this, and any Bulgarian will tell you about the Batak Massacre, one of the most horrendous atrocities committed by the Ottoman Empire on Christians. And so what happened was the Ottomans wanted the Christians in this area of Bulgaria called Batak to give up their guns. They did not want the Christians to have guns. Why not? Because they wanted to butcher the Christians. And they wanted to butcher the Christians without any sort of hindrance. They didn't want the Christians to be able to fight back. And that's why they did this. And so it says here, this is how horrendous this massacre was. This is how horrendous the massacre was. It says here, so this account was written by the wife of the son of the area's leader. And she wrote, "My father-in-law went to meet with Bashi Bazug when the village was surrounded and saw Ahmed Aja, who said he required the weapons to be collected from the villagers. Oh, just give us your guns. We're not going to kill you. Just give us your weapons. We just so happen to be asking you to give us your weapons." And yeah, it has nothing to do with us wanting to do a massacre, right? It says here that Trendafil went and had them collected. And Trendafil was the leader of the town. So he was the Christian leader of this town, and he was the mayor. And so the Turks said, hey, just have your subjects, have your people give up their guns. And just comply and you'll be fine. And so the mayor said, okay. So he told the people in the town, just give up your weapons, yada, yada, yada. And the people gave up their guns. And this is what happened. After they were handed in, after the weapons were handed in, the mayor, the one who was complying with the Ottomans to take all the people's guns, was shot with a pistol. He was shot at with a pistol, the ball from which grazed his eye. So as soon as they got the guns, they're like, okay, you got all the guns? All right, let's do the killing. Now we can kill people without any sort of disruption. And it says here, I then heard Ahmed Aja give the order with his own lips to impale and roast Trendafil. This is how evil these people were. So the mayor who said, okay, I'll comply, I'll get the people's guns. No. After he complied, the order was you take this guy who complied and you impale him and you roast him alive. You kebab him. They literally kebabbed this guy. And it says here, the words he used were shishak aor, meaning in Turkish to put on the spit, such as the slices called kebabs. They literally said, make this man into a kebab. They then took from him all the money he had stripped off his clothes, all the money he had, stripped off his clothes, put out his eyes and his teeth, and impaled him slowly until the stake came out of his mouth. This is how evil these people were. This is the Turks. And America wants Turkey to run Syria. But you read about atrocities like this, and NATO's policy is, have these people run it. Have the people whose ancestors did these atrocities run Syria. And they want to revive the empire that committed these atrocities. And still, NATO is saying, have the Turks run Syria. I mean, this is why I'm saying we are heading towards an utter nightmare. They're going to make Syria into a kebab. So the order was, take this mayor, impale him, put out his eyes and his teeth, and impale him slowly until the stake came out of his mouth. After which they roasted him on the fire, he being then alive. They roasted this man alive. He lived for half an hour during the awful event. Half an hour being roasted like a kebab. A number of Bulgarian women were present beside myself. We were encircled by Bashi Bazouks. Bashi Bazouks were basically mercenaries working for the Ottomans. So right now, Turkey has its proxy in Syria. Those are like the Bashi Bazouks. We were encircled by Bashi bazooks who hemmed us in on all sides so that we were made to see what was done to Trendafil. So they forced the women to watch this man being roasted alive. They thought he had more money concealed and was unwilling to give it up, and therefore they tortured and killed him. And they just butchered people. I mean, they butchered thousands of people. And it says here, one of Basilica's children, Vladimir, who was still a baby at his mother's breast, was impaled on a sword in front of her eyes. At the time this was happening, Ahmed Aja's son took my child from my back and cut him to pieces. There in front of me, the burnt bones of Trendafil stood there for 1 month, and only then they were buried. I mean, and you can go on and on and on about this nightmare, but when they start talking about, oh, give up your weapons, what does that mean? That's what this means. They want to commit massacres without any impediment, without any hindrance. And so this is the nightmare of Syria. And it's only going to get worse. And so this is the reason why Syrian refugees don't want to leave. This is the reason why, guys. They don't want to leave. And it says here, this is from the New York Times. This came out recently. Syrian refugees in Germany are glad they can visit home, but just visit. Oh, I thought the source of all the problems was Bashar. How come now they don't want to leave Germany? Oh, it's because they would rather live with Hans than live with Ahmed. The problem is that Hans is losing his patience, and Germans are, by the millions, they are voting for an ultra-nationalist party called the AfD. And so right now, from what I understand, the AfD is now the second most popular party in Germany. And this party used to be just a fringe party. It wasn't really that big at all when it first got conceived. But now the AfD is the second biggest party. And I've talked about this many times, but one of the guys who's running the party is a guy by the name of Bjorn Holke. He is one of the major leaders of the party. He's probably the most famous leader running the AfD. And Bjorn Holke used to write for Nazi publications. He used to write Nazi articles praising the Third Reich. And that's who Germans are voting for. That's who's getting the second most amount of votes in Germany. It's Bjorn Holke and his party. And you want to be a refugee in this country. They want to get rid of the refugees, or at worst, they want to kill them. And you're going to say, well, they just want to deport them. Maybe that's going to happen. Maybe they're just going to deport them, and they're going to deport them back to Syria, and that'll be the end of the Syrian migrant crisis. But perhaps, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? Perhaps they're going to put up camps. You just never know. With history, the strangest things can happen. And as it has been said many times, truth is stranger than fiction. So it says here that upon learning that Syria's dynastic dictatorship had fallen, Iman Mohammed, a Syrian refugee living in Germany, felt a surge of elation at the idea that she could return to her homeland. Oh, so she was so elated that Bashar al-Assad was toppled. But, and this is a big but that joy quickly faltered as another thought occurred to her. Going back to Syria could mean giving up everything that she and her family had built in Germany since making the dangerous trek to arrive there nearly a decade ago. And I think this makes perfect sense. I mean, these people have been living in Syria for over 10 years for the most part. Generally speaking, I mean, you have Syrian migrants who have been in Germany for over 10 years or for around a decade, and they have built businesses, they have built families, they have had children born in Germany. They've raised families. They have really established themselves in that country. So I don't blame them for wanting to leave. But the thing is that them not wanting to leave is triggering a tremendous amount of anger in Germany because the Germans want to see mass deportations. And in fact, the AfD had a secret meeting in Potsdam not too long ago. You can read up on it, in which they talked about doing mass deportations of all the migrants in Germany. So that is, for now, that is the plan at the AfD. It's to do mass deportations. And who knows, it might escalate into something worse. We've seen this before in German history, so it wouldn't be surprising that we see it again. And so it says here, in the cold light of day, when we really looked at everything that had happened, we realized not just yet, Miss Muhammad 41 said of the idea that her family might permanently return to Syria. So it says here that the decision may not be hers. After rebel groups toppled President Bashar al-Assad's government on December 8th, the prospect of returning home opened for the first time in more than a decade for the many Syrians who fled during the civil war that ravaged the country, including 1.3 million in Germany. But they don't want to leave. I mean, you might see them like here celebrating, raising up the flag, but they don't want to leave. I'm sure some of them will leave. I'm sure some of them have already left, but for the most part, they don't want to leave Germany. Why? Because Germany is a stable country. It's a first world country, and the Germans are a lot nicer than a bunch of HTS, ISIS offshoots. Let's be real here. Like I've said many times, the problem is what's going to happen when Hans runs out of patience? What's going to happen when the Germans are running out of money? What's going to happen when you have massive layoffs in Germany? And that is coming. You're already seeing it. You can read up on Volkswagen. You can read up on ThyssenKrupp Steel. These are major industrial companies in Germany, and they're saying we are facing major layoffs, not just for now, but for the future. We are facing the fact that we are going to be laying off thousands upon thousands of Germans because of the damaged economy in Germany. The German economy is not doing good. Out of all the economies within the EU, the German economy, I think, is hurting the most, or it's going down the most, if I'm not mistaken. There has been a major diminishment of the German economy. And so what's going to happen when you have major layoffs? What's going to happen when you have a lot of people who are unemployed and they're seeing these refugees living in their country? They are going to scapegoat them, and they have already been scapegoating them. But there's going to be some major scapegoating happening, and they're going to say these refugees drained our economy, they're taking welfare while we Germans are stuck here in poverty, unemployed, and miserable. And there is going to be a massive call to impose major government action against the migrants. They're going to say, let's deport them, but that could escalate into something worse. We've seen this before in German history. I wouldn't be surprised if we see it again. I wouldn't be surprised at all. And that's how fanatics actually take over a country. They take over a country based on massive amounts of resentment in the native population. This is how fanatics take over. This is how the French Revolution happened. This is how the Nazis took over. This is how the Bolsheviks took over Russia. They win on the fuel of resentment. Resentment is their fuel. And so, for example, right now I'm working on an essay on comparing our times with the time before Hitler took power, just so that we can see the parallels, just so that we can see that the idea of something like the Third Reich happening again is actually very possible. And one thing that you will see if you read about the rise of Hitler is that one of the things that happened before Hitler took over was there was massive resentment amongst the German people against mainstream parties. Mainstream parties. So you had parties like the Social Democrats running the German government. And by the time you hit the 1920s, you have massive amounts of the German middle class refusing to vote for a mainstream party. And they began to vote for the Nazi Party. They started to really vote for alternative parties, and the Nazi Party really, really benefited from this. And the most fanatical or the most radicalized sector in the labor force of the German nation was the farmers. The reason for this was because the German government, according to them, the German government was prioritizing big industrial farms over smaller farms. So you had millions of farmers in Germany who owned around 5 or so acres, and they were small farmers. And then you had thousands of these big farms that would have lots of acreage, and they were growing massive amounts of wheat. And so the government would protect these big farms with subsidies. They would say, okay, we're going to give you government money to protect you against the flooding of the country with really cheap products. So countries like Denmark and France and countries like Holland were flooding Germany with really, really cheap products. And those cheap products were bringing down the prices of produce in Germany, bringing down the prices of products like wheat. And so the German farmers, they could not compete with this flood of super cheap foreign goods. So the government said, okay, we're going to subsidize the major farmers with government money, so that way we can protect them. But then the smaller farmers would come out and say, hey, where are those government subsidies? We want those government subsidies. And the government said, no, we're not going to give that to you. We're not going to give small farmers subsidies. We're only going to give that to the big farmers because we need to protect the big farmers. So the small farmers in Germany were being screwed over by the government, and they were being completely weakened and outmatched by cheap foreign products. Back in early 2024, we were seeing these massive demonstrations done by farmers. And you had thousands upon thousands of German farmers protesting the German government. And what were they protesting? They wanted government subsidies. They wanted a government subsidy to cover the cost of their diesel fuel, because the German government started to say, well, we're not going to cover the cost of your diesel because we want to help the environment. This is what the German government was saying. We want to help the environment. So we don't want to pay for your diesel because diesel is bad for the earth, whatever. So the German farmers said, okay, well, we're just going to protest. They protested for what? Subsidies. And before the rise of Hitler, you had massive demonstrations being done by German farmers over what? For the most part, it was over the desire, the want for government subsidies. And it was fueled by this belief that the government was screwing them over. And so there was massive amounts of resentment. And those farmers were prime picking for the Nazi Party, and a lot of farmers would eventually vote for the Nazi Party. And this is just one example of how people were being radicalized in Germany. And so in Germany, what do you have? You have really the same thing happening. You have people abandoning the mainstream parties, not wanting to vote for mainstream parties, and they're voting for alternatives. They're voting for the Alternative for Deutschland party. And so we're seeing things happening in our own times that are parallel with what happened before the rise of Hitler. And it's very, very scary to see what's happening. And you see Elon Musk backing the AfD. He came out and said that the only hope that Germany has is the AfD. And the AfD has been running with that since then. They have been saying, well, Elon Musk has said that the only hope that Germany has is our party, so vote for us. And so you see Elon Musk using the power of X, using the power of Twitter, and using his voice to back the German nationalist. And Elon Musk is a what? He's a eugenist. He wants to inject into everyone's heads this Neuralink device. He wants to put computer chips into everyone's brains. And he believes that by injecting people with Neuralinks, that their brains are going to get better, and it's going to be this transhumanist idea of merging man with machine, and that the people who will have the Neuralink in their brains are going to be functioning and performing better than the ones who are not going to have the Neuralink. And he believes that in the next 15 years or so, millions of people are going to have Neuralink. And the people who will not have Neuralink are not going to perform as efficiently as those who will have the Neuralink. And he says that the injecting of the Neuralink microchip into people's brains is going to be a part of human evolution, the next step of human evolution. And what did the Germans believe? What did the Nazis believe? The Nazis believed that by enacting eugenic policy, that they were transitioning into the next step of human evolution. The only difference is that the eugenics of our own time is basically transhumanism. But it's still eugenics. It's still this idea of engineering humanity with this motivation of advancing and accelerating the cause of human evolution. It's the same thing. And so, of course, Elon Musk is going to be promoting this ultra-nationalist party that has a leader who wrote articles in praise of the Third Reich. Of course he is, because he's a eugenist, and he wants to see eugenics. And he wants to see the revival of German nationalism, because what would the revival of German nationalism entail? Well, when you have a political leader like Bjorn Höcke who praises the Third Reich, what do you think his goals are? His goal is to revive Nazism. And what was Nazism all about? It was all about eugenics. It was all about ushering in this Darwinist utopia in which the people with inferior genes would be weeded out and the people with the best genes would be multiplying, and they would be the only people having kids, and therefore all these superior genes would be being perpetuated and humanity would enter the next step of human evolution. It's this idea of entering the next step of human evolution. And that's what Musk wants. And that's why he wants to see a revival of German nationalism, because that would entail a revival in Nazism. And it's quite horrific. It's quite horrific. So you see this chaos happening in Syria where Alawites are being targeted and butchered. You see all this sectarian violence happening in Syria. This is going to lead to Turkey doing a full takeover, an explicit takeover of the country. They are going to revive their empire. And then on top of that, you have these Syrians who don't want to return to Syria, and them not wanting to return to Syria is really acting as the fuel that is empowering the AFD. It's perfect propaganda fodder for the AFD, because the AFD can now say, well, these people don't want to leave, so vote for us because we are going to deport them. And so you have massive amounts of people voting for the AFD, and it looks like the AFD is going to get second place in the German election, and that's going to be a further step towards this revival of German nationalism. And yeah, those are my thoughts on that. You are seeing the revival of German nationalism, and you are also seeing the revival of German militarism. And who was one of the biggest allies of the Ottoman Empire? It was Germany. So you see the rise of Turkey. We are seeing the rise of Germany. And together, they're going to bring back the team that we saw back in World War I, in which the Turks and the Germans were allies. So those are my thoughts on that, guys. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.